Clube Social apresenta o Corre do Xamã. Vendendo amendoim na rua ou rimando na batalha, sua história é feita de vários corres. E para não parar, Clube Social sempre foi seu parceiro. Clique e confira a nova versão da música Dias de Luta, Dias de Glória com Xamã por Clube Social. Clube Social, partiu para não parar.
Vamos aproveitar o intervalo do seu podcast para falar sobre K-pop. Preciso contar uma coisa para vocês.
Que você faz dancinha no TikTok. Isso não vai me surpreender.
Mas o menu exclusivo do Mac com personagens do BT21 vai. Tem o novo Mac Crispy Chicken Cajun, molho Sweet Chili e Cajun e os personagens BT21 para você levar para casa.
Opa, depois do programa eu vou lá no app pedir, porque eu vi que os combos estão com frete grátis, né?
Clica aí no banner e pede agora mesmo. É por tempo limitado. Vai!
Hello and welcome to The Shift, the podcast that aims to tell the no-holds-barred truth about being a woman post-40. Created and hosted by me, writer and broadcaster, Sam Baker. This episode is a first for me. It's the first time I've ever interviewed someone without knowing who they are. Because today's guest, Carolyn Hays, is a best-selling novelist who has chosen to publish her new book under a pseudonym to protect her family's privacy. That book is one of the most powerful memoirs I've ever read. A Girlhood is a moving, compassionate, thought-provoking letter to Carolyn's transgender daughter, who was considered a boy at birth, but insisted she was a girl as soon as she could talk. This is a story of motherhood, authenticity, identity, and learning to be true to yourself. It's also a story about transphobia, a subject that's become a powder keg in recent years. And above all, it's a story about understanding and how other people can change us.
We cannot control the world, but we can create a home that's safe and good and as happy as it can be. And the rest of it, is always going to be, for all of our kids in different ways, is going to be dangerous and kind of a scary place.
Carolyn joined me from her home on the East Coast of America to share the reality of being a parent supporting a trans child, the seismic impact of child protection turning up on your doorstep, and how the very real fear of losing custody led the family to move across America to a state where they hoped their youngest daughter would be accepted. I want to thank Carolyn for her candour, and I hope you'll find this conversation as eye-opening as I did. Before we talk a bit more about privacy and authenticity, perhaps we should just start, if you don't mind, if you can bear it, because I'm sure you've done a few interviews already, with just going right back to the beginning. And maybe if you can tell us a bit about what happened.
Yeah. So, my husband and I are, having our fourth child. We're honestly pretty confident that we've got it down. Parenting in the best sense should always be humbling, right? So, we were like, okay, one more. What's one more? And then our fourth child was a boy. We sent out boy announcements. We have a daughter and two sons already. And then, as she grew up, I'm already changing pronouns. She really let us know that she was a girl, that God got it wrong.
How did she do that?
When I look back, now I'm in a lot of communities with families, of kids who were persistent, consistent, and acute at a very young age. She did it consistently. She argued with her classmates at school when they called her a girl, or when she had to get in the girls' bathroom line. She told her teachers. She's not an arguer. That makes her sound really fierce. She's a very sweet, gentle soul. But she let us know if she heard me talking about her, using male pronouns. If she was in the other room, like I'm talking to my mother, she'd call out from the other room, having heard me. Yeah. And all of her play was very girly. She'd play with trucks, but she'd be playing sisters, or the trucks would have a headband on them, or, at one point she had the Thomas the Train set, and she took the two bridge parts and taped them to her feet to make high heels. So this idea, if you just give the boy toys, he'll be a boy, you're like, well, I don't know, not necessarily. So, with her language, with, her play, with her self-portraits, with, everything in the way she talked about herself. And she was a very glamorous, little kid. I mean, she's just so, it came from another world. And so we, at that point, we talked to some specialists. I'm a writer, I'm a researcher. So we started to talk to people, trying to get the best people in the country to give us advice and what to do, and we were given a lot of different things. But eventually, we just said, okay, well, here are the pronouns that you prefer, and here's a little nickname that everybody's using anyway, and here's a barrette,
You've made it sound so smooth and easy. I mean, how old was she when she started? Maybe 3 or 4?
Yes, becoming very insistent by that point. Yeah.
I mean, how did that feel for you as a parent? She has 2 brothers and a sister, doesn't she? And, so you kind of felt like you had it down, and then all of a sudden this kind of like curveball comes at you.
Yeah. And I remember being very afraid. You're very afraid because if you think, okay, what if this is, really the rest of her life? And we knew one trans person, in our entire circle. So we didn't have very many models at that point. It was before Laverne Cox had been on the cover of Time magazine, with the tipping point. It was after Jazz Jennings had been interviewed by Barbara Walters, but she was like the only, trans child we had as an example. So there's not a ton of research and not a ton of stuff going on. So it was really, there was fear, of course. And I really remember crying one day in the car as my husband's driving me to work and saying, I don't know how to prepare her for a world that is so deranged kind of on this topic. There's places where she could get stoned to death or just murdered in the streets for looking different in this way. And then there's other people who would think, oh, she's so progressive. She's so, like she's the future. Yeah. It just felt like the world was going to take shape around her body in particular in ways that were so bizarre and had nothing to do with her, So the thing is, we had in our home, her transition was pretty healthy and good. But what do you, if the child is fine, but except when they leave the home, then who has the problem? Does my child have some, I feel like it's the culture that has the disordered thinking, right? My child is fine and happy. It's just in that way of moving out in the world. So I was very scared. My husband had his own, anxieties and fears around it and, questioning his own, like, what of my masculinity and like, which is all about us and not about her, but we had to go through it. But really, he said, we'll raise her the way we raised all of our other children, which is we cannot control the world, but we can create a home that's safe and good and as happy as it can be. And the rest of it, is always going to be, for all of our kids in different ways, is going to be dangerous and kind of a scary place.
And is that kind of how you've approached it? You've approached her the same as you've approached your other children?
Yeah. And I think sometimes people think parents who, have a trans child must be, these, laissez-faire parents and do you let the child do anything they want ever and da-da-da. And you're like, no, actually, I'm a pretty strict parent. But when she told me, mainly the thing was, when you say I'm beautiful, say she. And to me, also as a person of faith, big Catholic families. And when she said that, to me, she was speaking from a place of her divinity, of her soul. And I just felt like, wow, you do not mess with that conviction, how they want to be seen as beautiful. It is incredibly dangerous to mess with that. And so for me, it's been a journey, like investigating my own privilege, takes shape around my body very differently. But also like this incredibly beautiful journey where, again, we're looking at authenticity and somebody who had to fight to be authentic in the world. And then you kind of look at yourself and you say, am I being authentic in the world? And it's very liberating. And for people who are scared of people who are self-expressing or bitter about people self-expressing, it can be a very troubling journey for them, I suppose. But for me, it was an incredible journey to be on with someone who had that conviction and is claiming, her space and then saying, hey, claim yours.
It's so, one of the things that comes across so clearly in your memoir, which is absolutely beautiful, is her utter clear-eyedness. And it feels like, in the world where this subject seems to, if anything, have got worse, the debate around this subject in the time that she has been growing up and you have been going through this, if anything, the last decade has seen it become more of a powder keg, if you like. She comes across as very clear-sighted, as very, this is me.
Right.
What's your issue? Is that how she is, or is that you with the benefit of hindsight?
No, definitely. She was much more clear-sighted than we were because she was connected to herself and she knew herself. We were connected to the world and had already experienced all of our, baggage. So, no, she was definitely the clear-sighted one. And we were lucky that way because, with other kids, it's not as clear-sighted. There are a lot of kids who take up the middle space and, who need more space to explore their gender. And honestly, she's the most binary kid I have in terms of, upholding the
How
binary.
interesting. Yeah.
She just did it in a flipped way. So, and of course it wasn't smooth sailing. And that's what the book is about this knock at the door that changed our lives. And certainly for her, it's been in raising her, it's been a lot about when to protect her from some of the things that have already happened to her that she doesn't even really particularly know because we've guarded her, but then also allowing her to know bit by bit, exposing the world to her, but hopefully in a way that allows her to remain clear-eyed, that doesn't overwhelm.
So tell us a bit about that knock at the door, because that's a pivotal moment in your lives, in the book, but also it's like every parent's dread, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So shortly after, she transitioned, we of course had to tell people in the school, in, friend groups, family and neighbors and, just our whole community to let them know that this had happened. We were changing pronouns and this is the new name and da-da-da.
What was the response to that in general? The teachers, and were people respectful of that, or were they kind of horrified?
Right. See, this is the deep South. My husband's a New Englander, and we're from the Northeast, and so we're in the deep South. But we're in this little progressive bubble that we really believed in. It broke, it burst, and so the school was fantastic because they had a non-discrimination policy, and this gave them an opportunity to walk the walk. And so she was the first kid to go through this there. I know for a fact that since there have been many others, but they wrote a letter of support. The whole entire faculty and staff signed that letter, and in it they talk about their policy on being open and accepting to all people. So they were great. In general, we got a lot of support. I mean, even from the nuns and the priest who baptized our child and all that. We really did get an outpouring of love, even from Catholics. That did not remain true. We did get some Catholic backlash, but the obviously the people we were close to were incredibly loving. So there was a lot of support, and some from places that we didn't expect. People who were religious, right? And so in general, it was good. I think a lot of the bad was not said to our faces. And then not long after, within a month, there was a knock at the door. And that turned out to be someone from the Department of Children and Families investigating us for child abuse, basically for supporting our trans child. And so that sparked an investigation, interviews and plans and, talking with lawyers. It became clear very quickly that if a police officer comes back with the social worker the next day, we would lose custody. Our child is going with the police officer. Or if we had to go up into a court system, we would probably hit a Republican appointed judge because of the history of the state we were living in. We could lose custody. So it was a terrifying situation. And it really, changed everything for all of it. We ended up eventually leaving the state and moving north again to try and find a place with laws that could protect our daughter.
So did you have an inkling of who it was? Presumably somebody had reported you then?
Yes. Well, that's also the thing. I never got to do the healing or the reconciliation or the explanation or the shot at, wait, let me bring you in. Let's have the conversation. And it became a real paranoia for me. I didn't know. We were very nervous at school. Had it been one of the parents at the school, we didn't let the kids play in the front yard. We would pull the car into the garage. The kids would only play in the back. Who was it in the neighborhood? Was it someone who had a vendetta that was personal somehow? I mean, it was really, it tore at the fabric of not just us too. The rest of our friends and family who had supported us were also very disturbed. So it was a community that kind of felt this fracture as well. So, of course, I have in the book, I go on and I do investigative stuff on who I eventually believe made the call. And I still do not know 100%, but I do have my thoughts. And then, of course, since I couldn't, confront that person that way, I had to do this kind of forgiveness in absentia. I had to kind of move through to a place where I could forgive her. So yeah, it's strange, but I needed that kind of closure. So even though I couldn't confront, I still had to go through the phases.
Yeah, otherwise you'd go completely mad, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
One of the things that was really interesting to me was when the lawyer, when you'd had the knock on the door and this kind of seismic thing had happened. I mean, I'm paraphrasing wildly, but basically who's going to take the blame for your child being transgender? It's like, are you going to take the blame? Is your husband going to take the blame? Can you blame the school? Can you find someone to blame? And it's almost like that, all those things, those senses of blame and shame and guilt, they all come rushing in. And it's like, if we can pin it on someone, it being this person, then it'll be fine.
Yeah. Yes, because when somebody takes the blame, and if I were to have to go into a court, like it was literally one of you might be asked to leave the home. That might be one of the solutions here. You get to keep custody, but one of you has to take the blame and leave the home. And so you two should think about who that should be. It was just insane. But if you go into the court system and you perform your shame and you perform fear and you perform all this stuff, and shame and fear get so messed and entwined together. And you say, I'm so sorry. It'll never happen again. I promise, blah, blah, blah. We'll put her in pants. We'll take it all back. It reorders the patriarchy. And so everybody goes, oh, okay. It's fine now. We're back. Okay. We punished the people. They said that they were sorry. It will never happen again, because one of the things in our risk factors was that she had been born a boy and she was transitioning into a girl. And so that is something that our culture can't hold as a concept very easily. We understand why a girl would want to be a boy. That upholds the patriarchy in a lot.
Because it's so much better.
So much better, right? And it says, hey, men are powerful. Not that it's easy for families of trans boys at all, but that little bit kind of makes sense sometimes to a culture, whereas we were doing it the opposite way. That felt like an attack to that order. So, so if we could have performed that, done that, and then, which we would have. I would have done that. I would have figured out how to bide our time, get out of the courts, keep our daughter, get out of the court system and move, if that's what I would have had to have done, which is kind of a strange thing to look yourself in the eye and say, really? Like, are you a coward? You're not going to stand up and fight in a way. And I never got to have to make that decision, but for the safety of my child, I think I would have performed and gotten out.
And the court would have, to have you stand up and go, okay, this has happened because I'm a bad mother. That would have been okay for the court, because then they could go, okay, bad mother. We know what to do with bad mothers,
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know how that would have played out, but it's haunting.
Oh, it's hideous. You touched on privilege just now. So before we talk about your big move back to the Northeast, it's interesting, isn't it? Because very early on, you said something, like you're a successful writer and you know how to do research. And so you immediately plowed into those things, and you started from a point of privilege, really, of going, okay, I know how to do research, so I can find out about this and I can find out how to get help. And then you spoke to us, I think it was a solicitor, wasn't it, who went through that list with you, which is a really fascinating list of your risk factors and your privileges. Yes,
it wasn't actually a lawyer. It was somebody on the national level who helped families with trans kids across the board. But one of her specialties, and maybe she was the leading specialist in the country at the time, was a specific situation, because it was not isolated incident. This happened to families that had kids transition. The school nurse might make a call, or an angry aunt might make a call. There's all these different people who might make the call. And so a lot of people were put in this position. So she said, I don't have time to be nice about this or to be polite. I'm going to run you through a list of questions and you just say, yes or no, what applies to you. And the list was terrifying in a way. So, are you white? I got to say yes to that. Are you and your husband married? Yes. Are you heterosexual? Yes, both of us. Do you have money to pay for lawyers? Yes. What's your education level? Blah. We got to go down that list with every answer that I got to say yes to. I saw the family that did not get to say yes to that answer. I was haunted by those families who, no, we're a lesbian couple. No, my husband is Black. Going down that list and seeing their risk go up because of not just the transphobia that started the whole problem, or the lack of understanding at that point too of what it is to be trans, but also all these other deeply ingrained, racism, sexism, homophobia, all these other things that really make some people's lives incredibly more difficult in our culture. You know what I mean? It's just they were at greater risk of losing their child to the court system.
Do you think that maybe the original inspector who came to your house, it makes me wonder whether that's why one of the reasons it didn't go any further was simply because you were, this sounds terrible, but the right kind of people?
I think a couple of things. I think just basically luck of the draw. The file falls on a desk. Who's that desk? How does that person feel that day? And, it was his first time too. He had no idea what questions to ask. He has to interview each child alone. He knows how to ask about abuse, but he has no idea what to ask a little girl. He's sitting there. He's just at a loss. So it was luck of the draw. He did pull up to a house that, had some money. We weren't fabulously wealthy or not. He certainly noticed that it was a house where the kids' art was on the wall. There's obviously space for the kids to play. Like there was a certain home quality to it that felt to him like things that got written up. This is a good home, a safe home. But somebody else would have just come in and could have very much ratcheted up the situation.
Yeah, and how did it, because your other children were at this point, they had to be questioned, didn't they? How did this, is it a 7-year gap between your third and fourth children? Is that right?
Yeah, and a 12-year gap between the oldest and the youngest. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so how were they impacted by it?
Well, my oldest daughter, was 12 when the baby was born. And so this was her baby too, in a way. She has the maternal, there's no sibling rivalry at all, because the gap is too big. So it's really this sweet, sweet maternal relationship. It was very hard for her, hardest on her. I was also pregnant at the time with our 5th child. And, I talk about that in the book. I ended up having a miscarriage. And I believe that it had a lot to do with the stress of this situation. It was absolutely timed to the situation. Yeah, that was it's like insult to injury. You know what I mean? So that was very hard for the family, but especially hard for her. My oldest really took the miscarriage very hard in the whole thing. And also it leaked into her school life and there were rumors. And so she took definitely the hardest of all of us in a way. Yeah. So and then my second kid is very funny. He's very, that's his defense mechanism. He was hilarious with the interviewer. He was dating a girl who had a far right Christian family at the time. So there were complications there. But he's always the one like, look, she's going to be fine. Out of all of us, the baby will be fine, So he always builds me up in another way. And then the other kid was our third child, is a quieter kid. He's, he's a soccer player and like an athlete and is relatively quiet. And he was just so loving to his little sister. In that interview, it was interesting to see him just, for being so shy and quiet, to be so quietly loving. Especially as a kid who's so like kind of a bro, Yeah. So yeah, I think it definitely opened them up to a world. I'm so happy that they've gotten to see somebody who's had to push more. I think it's definitely affected them when they're in different situations with all different kinds of, diversity, minorities, and they see things differently. Once you see the system at work against somebody, it changes your understanding of the system.
Did that experience with the knock, did that lead directly to the move?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. We would probably still live there if not for that. Yeah.
And you lived in a state which actually has become, well, I'm going to say worse because I think it's worse recently, hasn't it? Was it Texas? Is that okay to say? I don't want to.
Well, I want to talk about Texas and Florida, if that's okay, because they've both been a nightmare. And I think it's important, especially for people in the UK and Europe, to understand that Texas is home to 39 million people. And I think Florida is close. I don't know what Florida is, but it's one of the 4 biggest states in the entire country. So we're talking about country-sized states here. Yeah, so Texas, so what happened to us felt at the time just like a bureaucratic accident. The idea was still so new, so few people understood what, there could be a child who is trans. And so we felt like, okay, if the education goes up, we'll be able to, this will stop happening, we'll be good. But in Texas, in the last year, they made it the law. So what happened to us became law. If you know of a family who is supporting their trans child, if you are a doctor and you know of a family, or a school nurse and you know of a family that is supporting their trans child, you have to report them, and they need to be investigated for child abuse.
So horrifying, isn't it? And so when you moved north, presumably you were choosing between the states where you knew your daughter's rights would be protected at that point.
Mm-hmm.
How did that work out?
Yes. Well, so we went through this period of growth and good. There's the Obama administration was great. As Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton was doing great things, helping the passport system become easier there's all this great movement. And then, Trump came into office, and especially Mike Pence's agenda was really about, going after trans people and anti-LGBTQ. So everything kind of, there's this huge backlash. But at that point, and for the years that followed, the state that we moved to was right on the cusp of, and we were told it will definitely pass. So we went right before it passed, but protecting trans kids in K-12, kindergarten through senior year of high school. So in the public school system, they got all their rights and protections. And then these kinds of laws were even passing in Republican-led states. New Jersey had a Republican who signed them. Maryland had a Republican who signed the protections. And it was just looking like such positivity. And then the backlash has been incredible. What's scary about it, it's very lockstep. And now Florida with Ron DeSantis, who will probably run for president, is also, he's just putting in a lot of laws right now that are really aggressively targeting trans kids. But yeah, 155 laws against, I think, trans kids in particular were pushed forward. They didn't all pass, but pushed forward in 2022. One just in Oklahoma bans trans care up until the age of 26 in the state. So it's a strange time.
Yeah, it's and I'm guessing that your daughter must be about 16 now, is she? I mean, I don't want to say or do anything that infringes her privacy, so do say.
No, yes, she's about to turn, 16. Mm-hmm.
And so how is it now? How is she now? Because when you moved there, I think the word you use in the book is stealth. I don't know what the right word is to use, but having been effectively out in Texas, would it be fair to say you went back in? Is that right? I'm sorry if it's
a funny thing. Yeah. And in the book, I never say what state it is. So that we were in or that we moved to. But yeah, I think, and stealth, I don't know how I feel about the word stealth. And we talked a lot with her as a little girl about a secret versus what's private, because a secret feels so shameful. And we were so scared of our fear being misinterpreted by her as shame. And shame is such a hard legacy. And we just have seen so many people in the LGBTQ community, as adults still struggling with that. So yes, so she really wanted to, we all thought, well, let's just make it easy. We'll have her go in just, she's a girl, she'll go in as a girl and that's what it'll be. And then we felt we needed that community too. So we needed some really staunch advocates who'd have our back in case something went wrong. So we also built people who knew. And then she told a few friends she would choose here and there who she wanted to tell her private, story to. So now, she's great. I don't know. She's, math is hard. And and she got an award in French last year that she was really excited about. And, she's great. She's thriving and she's delightful. Like she's just such who do you want to go to dinner with? I want to go to dinner with her, so she's really in so many ways, like just such an easy child to raise. It's kind of funny. And that decision for her is all about safety. How does she feel safest? She's not visibly trans, so no one, in fact, when we tell people that she is, when we have that conversation, they're totally baffled by, very confused. So that's another kind of privilege too, in the trans community, that if you are visibly trans versus, you're not. And so right now, no one in the school that she currently attends knows that she's trans. In her previous school, a couple of kids, she just changed. So she's finding those friendships and deciding whether she'll have those conversations or not. I mean, I want her to finally find a community and a world for herself where, she really gets to be out. That used to be a lot easier in a way when you could control things online. And now with, you're out, you're kind of out. So those are all conversations that, we continue to have.
Yeah, I'm sure, because when I was thinking when I was reading the book was that, puberty must be here. And that shifts the balance again, doesn't it?
Yes. And and I think that when it comes to trans kids, I read this really interesting review. It was a review of a book called This Body I Wore by Diana Getch, who is a late transitioning trans woman, a writer, brilliant. She published a ton before this. And the review was also brilliant. The review really talked about a queer time, and how things happen, at different speeds. And so, I think a lot of times with trans kids too, you don't see them necessarily always super interested in dating. I mean, some are, of course, but others are just very aware that, their time frame on everything's just going to be a little bit different. So yeah, her coming into this period in some ways is very different than my other kids. But of course, if she were, any trans person who's deciding to date, they have to have those kinds of conversations, and I think that's just so far off of her radar right now. So it's interesting to see, to see how those things have to continue to be navigated. You don't just come out once, you kind of, throughout your life and coming out over and over.
How has it been for you? Have you found it hard to get support? Have you found people around you?
Yeah. I mean, there used to be a great conference in Philadelphia that was in person for year after year. And so we kind of made some friends. Basically, we created cousins for my daughter. There are 3 other families in our little group. Our children were very similar in that they were very young and very persistent and consistent in their identities. So these families we still stay in touch with. We get together every few months or, and so she has these kind of cousins who sometimes she gets along with, sometimes she doesn't, it doesn't really matter. Like you're in it with them. So that's been great. And my family and our friends and all of that have been really wonderful. We tend to like people who are open and loving and, compassionate. So it's been good.
I mean, I feel slightly conscious that I'm in many cases asking you questions I already know the answer to because I've read the book. But how was it telling the older generations of your family? Because that must have been quite daunting, was it?
Actually, because my parents lived through the 60s and 70s. So they weren't hippies. My parents were not at all. They, my father was, kind of a corporate lawyer type, but he did yoga, So there was an openness. My father had also marched for civil rights. And so he immediately saw this as a civil rights issue. And he plugged it into his understanding of civil rights, and he just took it and went that way, and it was very clear to him. My mother took it spiritually, and she really looked at her faith. She's Catholic. And for her, she found the footing that she needed. And honestly, she just kind of forgot, that there was any other child. She's like, I look at that child and that's my granddaughter, it's so clear. My husband's family is a little bit more, New Englanders are pretty uptight, as a group. So they kind of took it staunchly and said, absolutely, we will do what we are told. And we never really heard much about it. They never checked in, never talked about it. Like it was just, and forward. And that was fine. We'll take that over, because it is really, really difficult for so many families. They lose, connection sometimes with their own parents who just refuse to adapt and just won't do it. And therefore, they're going to choose their child's health and well-being over the relationship with their parent And then sometimes they don't. Sometimes they really try to figure out ways to protect the child, but maintain the relationship. That is a really difficult conversation that comes up again and again when you're talking to families with trans kids.
We've kind of touched on the transphobia that's been kind of growing. There's a huge amount of it here. And one of the things that struck me is I saw a conversation on Twitter where somebody was saying, you know, that in America, transphobia is more of a right-wing thing, whereas in the UK, it's reached beyond those boundaries. And, you know, and there are a lot of feminists who are, well, some are on the fence, some are decidedly not on the fence and don't accept the womanhood of trans women. How has that impacted you personally? Have you had friends who've held that view, ex-friends maybe?
Yeah, I think one of the problems, the people on the fence are concerning to me because that concern trolling, you know, like, I'm not transphobic. Trans people are great. It's just that, you know, and start that sentence in any other way. People of color are great. I'm totally supportive. It's just that, well, you know, that it's just that probably made you a racist, right? You know, women can do anything. It's just that. Okay, well, you know what? You probably are sexist, right? You're about to lean it. But for some reason, it's still okay to do that with trans people. And so the people on the fence make me I'm nervous about them because they can go either way, right? And they can really pile on. In America, I'm always prepared for the punch that flies in from the far right. I've always got my, you know, shield up. And then I totally have my flank down when it flies in from the far left. But I have found that you can always work with I just have better luck if I've worked with somebody who's open in any way. And I found that academics use intellect and argument to actually close the doors to their heart. And I can't get in. And the thing is, I don't know what the, you know, TERFs and other people are going to do with kids like mine. Tell me how in any way my daughter was not raised as a girl. She has no memory of, she looks at her boy baby pictures and is like, oh, wow. But she went to school as a girl. She didn't go to school as a trans girl. She went to school as a girl. She's very much a feminist. She's fighting. I mean, she's actually far more a feminist than she is a trans rights activist. Trans rights are still kind of confusing and new to her, but feminism, she totally understands. She can join into any conversation about being a little girl and being treated like she's sweet when actually she's tough. And, you know, the way she's been condescended to as a girl, like everything there. So I don't know what they're going to do with my generation because, you know, she has every right to be in those conversations. I think this feeling of this concern that they have or this fear that they have for the women's spaces, you know, to me, I just want to look at them and say, everything's okay. It's totally fine.
Yeah.
If you could have elected and had a choice as to whether when I had my fourth child, it was a girl or a boy, no one in the world would have cared if my daughter had been born a girl. No one, or a boy. Who cares? And then suddenly at this point, you have to freak out because, yes. So my daughter is banned from sports in the United States of America and 18 states in America. She can't play high school sports and she's terrible at sports. So the fear is that she's some, you know, great athlete because, of course, the patriarchy tells us that all men are better than women in, you know, sports. I mean, she went into high school like me, tiny, you know, like her dad was also small. We were athletes, but she was 4'10" and 75 pounds and banned from sports in 18 states in the United States of America because of her athletic dominance, right? It's just ridiculous. Yes. So I think that I'm really very disappointed that feminists can't make space. And again, we're talking about a small percentage of feminists who make space. Most can. But it goes back to the beginning of the movement for trans people. They're hearkening back to that first political debate they had, and that feminists were really angry at men and really were threatened by what they really believe is that trans people don't exist and that they are just men in dresses trying to go into their spaces. What happened, at least in the United States, is that then AIDS came along and the community of AIDS brought everyone together in trauma. And the people who were hit the hardest by the AIDS epidemic early on were trans women, primarily sex workers. And so feminists came in, women came in, and really a lot of them did great work and dedicated themselves, gay men and also trans women in that crisis. And a lot of money flooded in to help those resources. And so in trauma, we all, there was bonding there. And then this new vitriol and anger and hostility, first of all, it just doesn't make sense for the new generation of trans girls and women who 100% don't even know what male privilege is, have never experienced male privilege. So it doesn't really make sense. But yeah, people are going to have to get their act together. But the main thing that helps them get their act together is seeing these kids and meeting them and just realizing, oh, yeah, they're just kids. Like, they're great. Nothing to fear.
Yeah, and it's about them. It's not about you. And I think that's I don't mean you, I mean you won, Like, I think that's one of the things that struck me again and again, right from your daughter's little friend when she was 5 through to people you speak to now. It immediately becomes about, well, how does this impact me? What does this mean for me? It's not a conversation about your daughter's rights. It's about their rights.
Right. Yeah. And that's been the history of certainly all civil rights when there's a majority, I can speak for in the U.S., desegregation and bringing, having interracial schools and all of that was really about how is this going to affect my white son, my white daughter. The white community could never see, what are the benefits to the Black community? And then once it's a benefit to the Black community, how that benefits all of us. And that's the thing, too, that I feel so strongly is that my daughter makes every room she's in a brighter, smarter, better, funnier, more creative room. You want her in the room with you. So you can close the door if you want to. But again, that's your loss. And at a certain point, it just becomes really just weird and quirky, just a weird, quirky thing that you think that my daughter doesn't deserve to be there. It just doesn't make sense.
How has it affected your own feminism?
Oh, yeah. Yes. Interesting, because, I really thought of, things like high heels and makeup and all of that as being thrust upon me, Gender is a social construct. That was so helpful to me in college, like that understanding that, oh my gosh, it's not just me for some reason. I love to be feminine. And it's all about, the patriarchy and this being imposed upon me. And I loved it. It was so liberating. And I totally understand why people want to hold on to that and want to apply it to trans people. But of course, gender identity isn't that. It isn't the social construct. Gender identity is how you wake up in the morning when no one's around and you're completely just groggy waking up and that your gender, a deeply held core belief. And then my first daughter was very much a tree climber and an athlete and, like me, rough and tough and, playful in that way. But then to have a daughter who made the high heels out of the Thomas the Train Bridge and one of her first expressions was smoky eye. She would say mokey eye. Mokey eye. And so it's really in seeing her, express what seems to me like just extreme feminism, but with no interest in, the patriarchy, no interest in men, no interest in boys or, anything like that. It to me is like, oh, this is someone expressing art. Her gender expression is coming from, again, such a pure place of like, of her sense of beauty and her sense of wonder. And, and she makes her own dresses and she's very interested in fashion. And so seeing all of that really, it opened me up to understanding the spectrum and understanding that you can be a feminist, really hardcore feminist, and just be in stilettos, and full hair and makeup, which had never really dawned on me before. I was so limited. So anyway, she's expanded my understanding of feminism.
We started off talking about authenticity. I mean, what do you think, what has she taught you about authenticity?
Yes. To see someone, just fight, for her right to live an authentic life, to pursue happiness, which is, part of our rights as Americans. It's built into our system. Her right to pursue happiness and then to claim it day after day, just joy, has really, shifted in me. I mean, the whole journey kind of broke me open, swung the doors of my heart wide open. And same with my husband. I mean, he would say, I was starting to get really good at golf. I was thinking, I'm going to wind this down and instead, he's gotten to go on this journey where he's, figured out his own sense of who he is in the world. And again, it's not about them, it's about you. And then, the beauty and peace and power that comes with that. I think that's really threatening to people. That is really threatening to people to say, I don't care about all the structures. I'm going to be who I am. There's St. Francis de Sales has a quote, be who you are and be that well, and I love that. And so I think that our whole family and those who've been privileged enough to be in rooms with her, really gets to see that in action. Be who you are and be that well.
And this is a kind of insanely huge question, really. I'm guessing you must be in your kind of early 50s now. How has this journey, how has it shaped you now?
It is a huge question. And the shift, we could talk about the shift as well in my body and how I'm changing and all of that. It is really interesting to think about, our physical bodies too, and how they change over time, and how I think because I've been broken open in this way and been able to see more people more wholly for who they are and more wholly for what might be going on with them because of the way the world takes shape around them, maybe with more hostility. I think it's made me gentler. I don't know whether I would have become gentler anyway, perhaps, but it was very strange that one of my go-to emotions is anger. I feel injustice with anger. And because of the situation I was put in after the knock at the door, I didn't feel like I was allowed to be angry because it was not useful in the situation, and everything had to be useful. And then not practicing anger as a response, because I felt like it was blocked from me, made me work on all these other skills and forced me to work on things like compassion and forgiveness and really figuring out, who's really to blame here, like structurally. So I think that where I am now is a little bit gentler than where I was when all of this started.
And you mentioned the kind of change, the shift in our bodies and our minds when we enter this age. Where are you at with that?
I mean, really, really should I be really personal?
Go for it.
I'm almost there. I've thought I was almost there many times though, but I still have if I can make it to summer without a period, then I will be fully menopausal. So that's my very intimate answer to that question. Yeah. But I think I am very interested in, I love the brain. You know what I mean? You saw in the book, brain research is fascinating to me. Hormones, the way that they inform the baby in utero, all of that's fascinating to me. So it is very interesting to me. And I've just started to, just begin the research, honestly, on what happens to our bodies in aging, but also what happens to our bodies hormonally as we change into this age. And I have a lot of positivity about it, honestly. I think that there's first of all, so much more research and it's getting more interesting. But yeah, I think weirdly optimistic, maybe counterculturally, because our culture tells us not to be. But
our culture is wrong.
Yeah, our culture is wrong. Yeah.
Right. I'm just going to ask you the questions I always ask. What's your emotional age?
I think it's often around 22. Sometimes in a weird way, 22. That used to be my answer. I think it's shifting because of my thing. But at 22 and maybe 8th grade, those were two eras for me where I was very focused. Incredibly focused. 8th grade, I was not kind of caught up in all of the mishigas of, men and dating, you know what I mean? Like all the mess of it. And it was so close. I very much knew who I was. And I would say again, at like 22, I had a very crystallized idea of who I was. And then I feel like I've just been so overrun for many years with work, the work of raising a family, the work of being the breadwinner, all of that. And now I can feel that a sense of confidence, of quiet confidence returning, of clarity, of who I am. So I don't know if that makes sense. And if that's my interpretation of your question is correct.
Yeah, it makes total sense. And I suppose for me, I'm thinking that might be 22 or it might be 52.
Right.
It might be like reaching a point of all of that kind of, hopefully that maelstrom has calmed down and this is who I am. Maybe.
Yes, I like that.
Can you give us a book recommendation? So it can be something that's been hugely significant, or it can just be something you read recently that you loved.
Yes, we had a book by Diana Getch This Body I Wore. It's gotten on a lot of best of lists, end of the year. It came out last year. It's really like a love letter to New York City in some ways. But also it's about a woman, a teacher, a poet, a creative who transitions late. So she's a little bit older than I am, but I just love the book because it really, again, I think that sometimes the cultures, the young who are getting all the privilege of all new tech to science, and those who transition later, but just one generation before, I'm fascinated in bridging the gap and paying homage to all of the work that the previous generation did in civil rights and LGBTQ civil rights. But also just, I love her story. I love her voice. And she's just a great writer.
I'm going to investigate that, see if it's published here. What advice would you give younger women, or would you?
I love advice. I love to give advice. I love to get advice. One of the things that they say about women, and I don't know whether in the UK this is prevalent, but women will say themselves, I don't want advice. I just want you to listen. I just want to vent. And I think that I don't want just to vent. I want to vent, and then I want you to give me your take. I'm always interested. But again, it has to be. But that listening period is so important. Because if you're not listened to, then the advice just says, fix it, stop talking and fix it. And that's not helpful. So I am wary of giving advice without knowing someone's very specific situation. Because one person I might say, you need to go harder. And the other one, you might say, you need to forgive yourself and take a beat,
Yeah, that's true.
So it is tricky. But I think my wish for them is those moments of clarity, knowing who they are, figuring that out, be who you are and be that well, because it includes like accepting who you are, really knowing who you are, but accepting who you are. So, and then being that well.
Brilliant. Give us an older woman who inspires you.
Oh, well, my mother is still alive. And well, my father too, they're both, he dances every day. They're in their late 80s, mid to late 80s. And my mother is an amazing, very funny woman. She uses a comedy to diffuse situations, which I find incredibly powerful. I think that her connectivity to people and how it keeps her alive, like that she just is connected to each one of her grandchildren. She has their work schedules and class schedules in her brain. Like she knows where everybody is at any given time, which is fascinating memory-wise. Wow. And also her love for story and the idea that she really hoards stories. She loves stories so much, gossip and whatever, but story. And she holds them all in her brain so clearly. And I think that she taught me to believe that the power of story to change people, to change their minds, to open them up, to entertain them, but also while you're entertaining them, to have them experience change or healing, or just that stories are powerful. So I think that, she's someone who's important to me.
Brilliant. What's your superpower?
Getting over it. I mean, the book feels like maybe not getting over it because I had to go back through, but I really do. It's very strange to my husband because he came from a family where once somebody apologized, that gave you the opportunity to really lean in on them because it showed their weakness. So you could really attack them once they apologized. And he was very confused when I was like, oh, yeah, no problem. It's okay. It's fine. It's great. After he apologized, he was baffled that it really left me, like it would leave my body. And I'd be like, no, I'm good now. We're good. It's so confusing to him. So I didn't think about it as a superpower until, now many, decades ago when we got together. But when I forgive somebody, truly forgive them, it really leaves my body. So, and that is incredible because it opens up space to go forward. So for me, that's been a superpower.
Do you think you'll ever be able to forgive the caller?
Yes. Already done.
Amazing.
Yeah. I mean, I wish I could do it in person. Could I do it completely? If I got the chance to meet her in person, could I do it completely cleanly? That's the question. Or would I want to go back and rehash?
And another thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Would I really be? But I think I could. I really do. I really think I could. So, yes. I mean, I do. That's the thing about forgiveness too. Sometimes it's not just a one and done, especially if it's someone in your family. You have to continue to forgive them.
Last one. How many fucks do you give?
Well, my New Year's resolution almost every year for the last 10, 12 years was to have more fuck it. It was just like, have more fuck it, you know? And in December, I was in a meeting and I gave 0 fucks in this meeting. And after I got out of the meeting, I thought, maybe I don't need to make that a New Year's resolution anymore. Maybe I could just tone it down a little bit. Yeah, I was always somebody who could kind of say fuck it, but I think it's really important to do that more and more. And in order, if you're going to be who you are and be it well, you got to say fuck it.
That's great. Thank you so much, Carolyn, and thank you for giving me so much time.
Oh yeah, thank you. It's been great chatting with you.
Thank you for listening. You can hear a new episode of The Shift each Tuesday, wherever you get your podcasts. If you like what you hear, please do rate, review and follow, because it really does help other people find us. And if you'd like to support The Shift further, please consider becoming a member of our community. Find out more at steady.media/The Shift.